A lot of you in the chat. It's so great to have you come by and support Robin's channel. I appreciate Jill for showing up tonight and participating in the debate. I appreciate Robin for facilitating this and for hosting it, and for Hizzle for moderating the debate tonight. So my opening is going to be a little bit longer than I thought, because I just got informed here last minute that we're changing the prompt. I'm going to go ahead and work with the new prompt. My understanding, it was going to be condone slavery. Now we're switching it to prescribe slavery. So let's get into the definitions of what a prescription is. A prescriptive approach focuses on how things ought to be, establishing norms, rules, or standards to guide behavior, language, or decision-making. Prescriptive methods often come from authority, tradition, or formal guidelines and imply a judgment of right or wrong. Whereas descriptive approaches, in contrast, focuses on how things actually are, observing and documenting real-world usage or behavior without imposing rules or judgments. Let's see if I can just get to this here. Well, it doesn't really matter. So you guys get the idea, the difference here. I don't have to read through all this for the sake of time, but prescription is what we're looking for here. So prescription is often coming from authority, describing norms, rules, or standards to guide behavior. That is what we are focusing on tonight. The behavior that we are focusing on here is going to be found in Leviticus. We'll start there. So in Leviticus, the verse here we're talking about, and oh, why did it do that? Oh, no, that screws me up. Oh, this is going to be a hassle. Okay, so shit. I wish that wouldn't have happened. It may not let me fuck. Well, okay. So property. Okay, good. So property, this is the word right here. For the male and female slaves, them you may acquire because they are your property. In the past, my opponent has tried to infer that when it says property in the Bible regarding your male and female slaves, that this specifically is in verse 45 we're talking about, that they're referring to the foreigner, and that you may pass them off as an inheritance because they are your property. And he has said that property has held a different context than it does today. And that can be true in certain instances, but what we have to do is actually look at the usage and the context. So this specific use of property in the Hebrew, there are 58, you'll see right here, 58 total references throughout the Bible using the same exact Hebrew. The grammar is always as a possession of a material object. I researched all 58 usages: possession, 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 possession. This is talking about land, articles of clothing, silver, livestock, cattle, again, mostly about land. So it is a material possession. It is absolutely, by definition, dehumanizing to refer to a human being as a material possession. Okay, that is a fact. That is how we think of things ethically in today's world, which is why slavery has been abolished. People are not property, and it means the same thing today in this regard as it did back in the biblical slavery time. Okay, so let me go out of that. We'll just leave that up there for your sake. I don't think you need to see all this. Okay. Is that showing? Well, whatever. So the manual on how to own slaves. This is the conclusion that you will reach after tonight's debate. Yes, we are talking about the Bible. The contents within include the guide on how to get away with beating the hell out of your slave, the groups of people that you can own as property and pass off as inheritance, how to procure some concubines. Let's get into the data and find out if the Bible condones slavery. Slavery, God tells you that you can own people as property for life and pass them off as an inheritance to your children because they are your property. Reference Leviticus 25, 44 through 46. I just gave you the definition of property as a material possession in the same sense that a piece of land or a piece of livestock or an article of clothing, silver, money, etc. Beating your slave to death. If you want to beat your slave to death, all you need to do is make sure that you don't knock out any of his teeth, and that they don't die within the first 48 hours. Reference Exodus 21, 20 through 21. Slavery was never condemned, not in the Old Testament or the New Testament. The New Testament's most prolific writer, Paul tells slaves to obey their masters with a sincere heart, just as they would obey Christ. Ephesians 6:5. He also tells slaves to obey their masters with fear and trembling. Colossians 3:22. We know that Jesus was a Jew who practiced and promoted the 613 Mosaic laws, which of course prescribe slavery. According to scholarship, we're going to cite Haas, 2003, page 778. Slavery is a condition acknowledged in the Pentateuch in which a person is deprived of freedom, at least for a period of time, by being in subjugation to a master in order that the master may benefit from the labor of the slave. Slavery may be involuntary, in which case the slave is generally considered the property of the owner, and as such may be bought and sold. In Pentateuchal legislation, involuntary permanent slavery applies only to non-Israelites. Slavery may also be voluntary for Israelites, such as when they agree to work for a fellow Israelite for a limited period of time to pay off debts or to survive poverty or destitution. This voluntary slavery, we often think of it as indentured servitude, is often what Christians will almost always, when they get into the slavery debate, will obfuscate and say, no, there was no chattel slavery in the Bible. It was all indentured servitude and it was all contractual. That is a lie. The only indentured contractual servitude that we find in the Old Testament slavery laws, this Old Testament slavery prescriptions, are about foreigners. The foreigners does not apply to foreigners. Excuse me. It only applies to fellow Israelites, such as when they agree to work for fellow Israelites for a limited period of time to pay off debts or survive poverty or destitution. But because God brought the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt to serve him alone as master, they are forbidden to bring fellow Israelites into a condition of permanent slavery, as was the case in the rest of the ancient Near East. Permanent slavery is permitted only for a Gentile in subjugation to a Hebrew. The Israelites' identity as people redeemed from slavery has direct implications for the forms of slavery that existed in Israel and their treatment of their slaves, both Gentile chattel slaves and Hebrew bond servants. Next, I just want to go over a couple of citations. So what we are doing here, and when we compare the ancient Near East, the slavery laws from other nations compared to the Hebrew, what we find in the Hebrew Bible, we'll use Westbrook's research from 2003, page 9. While many of us are more familiar with these law codes, they are certainly not the only sources of legal information. I will discuss the sources here, but we'll return to some of them in the remainder of this book. Westbrook lists several types of textual sources: royal decrees and instructions to individuals, trial records, law codes, lexical texts, which contain legal vocabulary, transactional records, letters, historiographical documents, and literature. We will be looking at comparatively the laws of Ur-Nama, the laws of Lipit Ishtar, the laws of Eshnuna, the laws of Hammurabi, Middle Assyrian laws, Hittite laws, and Neo-Babylonian laws. This is what we're comparing biblical slavery to. This is not comparing biblical slavery to the slavery in the antebellum South, so that is a non sequitur. Debt slaves were free. Here we'll cite Westbrook from 2003b, page 380. Westbrook distinguishes between debt and chattel slavery in this way. Debt slaves were free persons who had entered slavery by reason of a debt. They were alienable, but their slavery was conditional upon the existence of the debt and would be terminated with its extinction for whatever reason. Chattel slaves were slaves who had entered slavery on any other basis and whose slavery was in theory permanent and unconditional. In Leviticus 25, I want to go through that. Yes, in Leviticus 25, 44 through 46, the very same passage that I cited with the word property and cited its usage as a material possession, which stands in direct contrast to the laws concerning Hebrew debt slaves. We see that foreigners from the surrounding nations, as well as those who are sojourners in the land of Israel, can be purchased as chattel slaves. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. This is Leviticus 25, 44 to 46, New International Version. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. So what we see there is we see the distinction. So context matters. How do we know these are chattel slaves, and how do we know there's a difference between chattel slavery and indentured servitude? It tells us right there. You must not rule over your fellow Israelites, and it says, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. The assumption here is that the alien is a chattel slave, not a debt slave. This is confirmed by the verb quana, purchase. A non-Israelite chattel slave is defined as a mikna kesep, purchased. You see this all throughout the Bible: Genesis 17, 12 to 13, 23, 27, Exodus 12, 44, or simply as kasapo, his property, Exodus 21, 21, and again in the verse we cited there in Leviticus. Slaves could not only be purchased, but they could also be born into slavery, as we will see in a later chapter. Exodus 21:4 describes children born to a slave who remain the property of the master. Other passages speak of houseborn slaves as one born of the house, Yelid Bayat. In Leviticus 22:10-11, we read, this is regarding a priest slave. So no one outside a priest's family may eat the sacred offering, nor may the guest of a priest or his hired worker eat it. But if a priest buys a slave with money, or if slaves are born in his household, they may eat his food. This is not a gift to the slave, being able to eat the sacred offering. This is not a good thing. The slave has to eat something or the slave will perish from malnutrition. Of course, the master is going to feed his slave. We see slaves born into servitude in Genesis 17:12, as Jeremiah 2:4. The author of Ecclesiastes himself boasts of his great wealth, which included slaves. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also own more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. Ecclesiastes 2:7. Mendelssohn, 1978, page 58. The Old Testament terminology corresponds to that in Mesopotamia. Yeled Bayat, houseborn slave, in distinction to Miknat Kesef, purchased slave. Ben Bayat, son of the house, and Azne Bayat, people of the household or domestics. The later term includes both houseborn and purchased slaves, as is evident from Genesis 17:27, and all of the people of his house, born in the house and bought with silver. I will continue. We see, therefore, there were basically two types of slaves in the Old Testament, debt and chattel slaves. This raises the obvious question, how did someone become a slave? There were several avenues to slavery. We have already established. I think for the sake of time, let me see if I can skip some of this here. We'll go here. Prop 2006, page 188. Persons mostly entered servitude due to economic distress, as we see in Leviticus 25:39, Deuteronomy, Isaiah, Amos. Throughout the Near East, debt was the main cause of slavery. Other ways to become a slave were sale by parents. We see this in Exodus, Kings, Nehemiah. Also due to poverty, judicial sentence, Exodus 22. Kidnapping, Genesis 37:28, Exodus 21:16, Deuteronomy 24:7, and captured in war. We see this all throughout Genesis, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Samuel, Kings, 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles. There was also the Yeled Bayat, houseborn, in the offsprings of slaves. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Jeremiah. After becoming a slave during the term of servitude, one was a chattel, much like domestic cattle. Genesis 12:16, 20:14, 24:35, 30:43, etc., etc. I own but still possess some of basic rights and the object of empathy, according to Job. One of the challenging, very slosh. Give me 1 second here. Apologize. Okay. Was slavery voluntary? And I'll just close up here. Was slavery voluntary or involuntary? Strictly speaking, much of the slavery that we see in the Old Testament was voluntary. That is, one could sell himself or those under his control into slavery in order to stave off poverty or to make good on a debt. However, two things need to be understood. First, involuntary slavery clearly existed in the Hebrew Bible. Second, although other types of slavery were technically legal voluntarily, passages like 2 Kings 4 and Jeremiah 34 tell us that one could be taken into slavery against their will in the moment, and that once enslaved, even as a debt slave, one was under the control of the master and could be kept against one's will, thus concerning the shared legal tradition of the Old Testament and the ancient Near East. Westbrook summarizes, although in practice, economic circumstances, and this is Westbrook 2009b, page 215, although in practice, economic circumstances would often force a person into slavery, the law in law, his act was voluntary. In other words, we must be very careful when we seek to identify whether individuals entered into slavery of his own volition. There is often a distinction between practical volition and legal volition. And I won't get into it right now, maybe we will later, but we see in the context of when a person is sold into slavery, it is not generally considered that it is not their decision, that the person that has authority over them, in particular, when a woman is sold into a concubinage, her father is the seller, the purchaser is the object, and the girl being sold is the subject. All right, I'll go ahead and close it out there so I don't go over my time. Thank you very much. We still there?
Yep, we still there. Thank
Okay.
you.
I couldn't see my screen, so I didn't know if I dropped you guys or what was going on. I was like, man, that was a lot of work. I hope I didn't just waste all that. Okay.
Nope, we heard all of that. Thank you very much for that intro. And now we have you out there, and we have Jill. Let's bring Jill up. And hello, Jill. And you have as soon as you start talking, your 15 minutes will start.
Okay. All right. Can I share my screen?
Yeah.
Give me a second here. I think I have to do it on my end, right? Well, thanks for having me, everyone. Robin, thanks for hosting, Hizzle, and for co-moderating. And OE, thank you for accepting this debate challenge. And let me just share my screen so I can get my slides up here. Okay, I should be ready now. Now this is Alec Moyer. Thank you for that opening, OE, and I really enjoyed the information you gave, the facts you gave, and especially that last quote by Westbrook that sort of helped clear up a lot of the confusion when he makes that distinction between being forced to pay back a debt because you took out a loan from Citibank and you have to pay it back now, or you owe the IRS money and there's a legal sort of forcing and paying back, and someone kidnapping you and whipping you and telling you need to work against your will. So that was wonderful. I love that. Thank you for that. But this is J. Alec Moyer, and he says something along the same lines, that basically the first rule, the first law when dealing with an individual in the ancient Near East, when it comes to work, is does he want to be there? That's the first law. And he says this, he says, Hebrew has no vocabulary of slavery, only of servanthood. So there was a system of servanthood in which you would be, in many cases, forced to work against your will. If you committed a crime, for example, you could be made a slave. And we have the same type of system today. That's in Exodus 22, verse 3. The idea is that you would have to be forced to pay restitution. If you don't have anything, if you stole someone's cow or you injured someone's calf, you had to work. You will be sold for your theft. So yes, just like today in our society, we do have a system in which we force people to work to pay restitution. I don't want anyone to be confused when the Bible says that you're going to be forced to pay, that somehow is chattel slavery. If that were chattel slavery, then what we're doing today would also have to be considered chattel slavery. So part of my biblical slavery challenge is to demonstrate that there are legal obligations to be made in the ancient Near East as well as today. And we shouldn't look back at a culture and suggest because their system was surrounding labor, not money or crypto or any other sort of system of payment, that was the way you paid back a debt if you owed it. That was expected of you, to work, to pay restitution. We call it community service today, but we don't call it chattel slavery. Okay, so it is disingenuous and dishonest to suggest that a culture is practicing chattel slavery because you see them forcing prisoners, rapists, grapists, murderers to pay restitution by working. I like that system, actually. I think that system should be implemented in our system somehow, some way. It used to be. We used to call them chain gangs. And we had no problem, and no one called it chattel slavery except for a bunch of blue-haired liberals in Silicon Valley. They're the only ones that suggested this is well, what really happened, what they're really saying is this reminds us of chattel slavery. So we need to get rid of it because it's taboo. It reminds us of what happened here, the horrors that happened in the antebellum South. So let's get rid of it. But chain gangs just is simply a way we implemented a system in which you force people to pay restitution for the damage they have done to society. Okay. Now, if you were a citizen and you did not break any laws in Israel, then this would apply. What J. Alec Moyer says would apply to you. There's no vocabulary of slavery, only of servanthood. And it is to be noted that conditions were such that the first item of legislation catered for the person who loved his master and did not want his freedom, quote unquote. So in the ancient Near East, if you wanted to be hired by a landowner, a wealthy landowner, you did not want your freedom. You wanted to be in that situation, in that household, because that's where your resources were, where your shelter was, your food, your clothing, and your provision. So you didn't want to be free in that case. Okay, so let's look at some scriptures, and then I'm going to try to answer some of the concerns OE had in his opening with some of the laws that were catered again around servitude, not chattel slavery, but servitude. You owe somebody money, you work for them. You owe the IRS, they don't garnish your wages in the ancient Near East. They don't push a button and then $300 are out of your paycheck now to pay back that Citibank debt. No, you went and you worked for Citibank. And you didn't get paid until the debt was paid in full. It's just that simple. Here are some laws in the ancient Near East, what the God of Israel actually says about slavery. Okay? Remember the children of Israel, before we start looking at some of these passages, remember the children of Israel in the story of Exodus. They were hired workers. They were skilled craftsmen, building pyramids and helping to set up the structures that we still see today, the amazing structures. They were working for Egypt as a vassal country, meaning their country had been swallowed up by Egypt, a great power, a colonizer, we would say today, or a liberal might say today. And they were a vassal state. So they were subject to Egypt. Egypt was their Washington, D.C. And they were working, and God had no problem. The Pharaoh was a good guy. He was friends with Joseph. But then that Pharaoh dies, and a new Pharaoh comes who did not know Joseph. And he began to oppress, and he began to force them to work without pay. Then God says, let my people go. He didn't say that before. So the Bible does make a distinction between chattel slavery and people who are being hired to work voluntarily and are being treated with dignity and respect. And he says no to one and yes to one and no to the other. We can see that in the story of Exodus. Amos chapter 2 says, this is what the Lord says. We don't care what OE says. The people of Israel have sinned again and again, and I will not let them go unpunished. They sell honorable people for silver and poor people for a pair of sandals. So Amos is a prophet of God, and he's not happy. God is not happy with this behavior. Deuteronomy 24:14 through 15. Do not oppress a hired hand who is poor and needy, whether he is a brother, whether he is an Israelite, or a foreigner residing in one of your towns, not an Israelite. You are to pay his wages, whether he is a brother, OE, or a foreigner. You are to pay his wages. Chattel slavery? Show me a chattel slave who got paid wages. And I'll show you someone that's not a chattel slave. You are to pay his wages each day before sunset. The sun couldn't even come up before he had to be paid, according to Israel, the God of Israel, because he is poor and depends on them. Otherwise, he may cry out to the Lord against you, and you will be guilty of sin. Doesn't get any clearer than Deuteronomy 24, Leviticus 25. Now, if your countrymen, now this is speaking about Israelites as well. So we have both. In America, we have laws that speak to us as citizens, and we have advantages as citizens, and then we have laws for the foreigners or the visa workers, the ones who are over here working on a visa. They don't have this access to the same privileges we do, but they're not oppressed. They're not treated like animals. So, of course, there are different laws. You had to be a citizen of Israel. Whether you were a foreigner or not, or born in Israel or not, you had to become a citizen of Israel to inherit all of the privileges, meaning you didn't have to do the harsh labor. But no one is being forced into chattel slavery, OE. No one. Now, if your countryman becomes destitute and cannot support himself among you, then you are to help him as you would a foreigner. As you would a foreigner. Wait a minute, I thought those foreigners were supposed to be the chattel slaves. You were to help them as you would a foreigner or a stranger. You are to help both. You are to help the countryman just as you would help the foreigner or the stranger, so that he can continue to live among you. How much time do I have left? Moderator. Can you hear me?
I can. Sorry about that. Locked up. You are at 4 minutes.
All right, 4 minutes. All right. I'm almost finished. Leviticus 19, thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning. You need to pay them before the sun rises. This is Leviticus 19. And then we also have other passages in the scriptures in Jeremiah. We're going to see that as well, where he says, woe to you if you're not paying your workers. How dare you? You shall not treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, or you shall treat the stranger. Excuse me. You shall treat the stranger. Oh, he wants you to think you shall not. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you. Treat them just like you treat your fellow Israelites. And you shall love him as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. For you were once strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So God is clearly telling the Israelites, hey, don't treat them like you wanted to be treated when you were in the land of Egypt. And you were oppressed in the land of Egypt. And of course, they became strangers in the land of Egypt when that new Pharaoh arrived, right? Exodus 12, there shall be one law for the native and for the stranger who sojourns among you. Exodus 22:21, you shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him. Oh, he's going to find passages in the Bible to suggest that they're being oppressed. But he's not going to be able to demonstrate that. For you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall not oppress a sojourner. Exodus 23. This is a constant theme. You know the heart of a sojourner. For you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. Deuteronomy 10. He's going to try to convince you that, hey, these slave laws only applied to sojourners, only applied to foreigners. No, they didn't apply to anyone. There's no chattel slave laws in the Bible. What they called slavery, we call work. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the sojourner, giving him food, clothing. In Israel, you were required to provide 10% of your crops to sojourners, foreigners, people who were passing by. You weren't even allowed to harvest 10% of the outer edges of your crops. Love the sojourner, therefore, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. Constant theme. Ezekiel 47, you shall allot it as an inheritance for yourself and for the sojourners. So those sojourners who were wanted to join the camp of Israel, the tribe of Israel, were set up with an inheritance. Show me a chattel slave that is set up for an inheritance. And I'm going to show you a case study of that in the case of Eleazar and Abraham. Jeremiah 23 or 22. Thus saith the Lord, do justice and righteousness and deliver from the hand of the oppressor him who has been robbed. Do no wrong or violence to the resident alien. Do no wrong or violence to the resident alien, the fatherless, the widow, nor shed innocent blood in its place. And then I want to end with Dr. J. Schuyler, excuse me. He says this, in English, we regularly use commercial language. This is speaking to some of the language that's used in the Bible, property, purchase. All of these words don't mean what they mean to us today. So we have a bit of a presentism fallacy being committed when you suggest that, hey, property means this. No, property means whatever they said it meant in the ancient Near East. We use commercial language but Jay Schuyler is going to actually argue something very interesting, that we still use this language today, even though we don't mean you're a piece of furniture. Terrell Owens, Michael Jordan, you're just a piece of furniture. No. So there's still a remnant of this type of way of speaking about human beings, even still today. So why is it that when we go into the biblical text, we suggest chattel slavery when we see the word property, when we see the word owned? Listen to Dr. Schuyler. We regularly use commercial language to describe people within the context, or when the context is commercial. If you go to Leviticus 25, the context is commercial. For example, trading a player to another team as one might trade a stock, or transferring an employee to another location as one might transfer money. We don't use this language because we view the people involved as less than human. We use it, again, still today, to this day, as was then. We use it, even though more frequent, more archaic, more ancient, but that's okay. But we still use it today because it accurately describes, as it did then, their circumstances in a given commercial context. To say that servants are property, Leviticus 25:45, or inherited, verse 46, is not to put them on the level of furniture any more than to say a sports star is traded, puts him on the level of a stock. Okay, that's Dr. J. Schuyler. And
okay, we're up to minutes. Yeah, if you want to take up, if you want to finish up another 30 seconds.
Okay, all right. Just quickly on the word property was mentioned. Yes, the word does mean possession, holding, landing, property, and hereditary possession. But notice that the emphasis is on, again, as you cited Westbrook, is on a legal holding or inheritance, not an intrinsic nature of what is possessed. Okay, that's important. And I'm glad, again, OE, you provided that quote from Westbrook, because that basically sums up my entire argument when it comes to possession and words like property. Thank you, OE, and I'll yield there.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Okay, so we'll move on into the rebuttals. OE, I'll give you.
Yeah, am I up here?
Yep, you're up here.
Okay, I don't need to share my screen for this. I'm just doing a rebuttal here, so I'm just reading off my own notes. Let me know when you want me to start.
All right, we are. Start as soon as you talk.
All right. Well, my opponent tonight, Jill, is the gift that keeps on giving. in his opening statement. We've only so far heard his opening statement, and we've already gotten a number of blunders. So one of them would be the straw man fallacy. And we see this happening a lot with Christians trying to use this terrible analogy of the sports contract that's being traded, and they try to relate this to slavery laws in the Old Testament. And this is a straw man. What a straw man is, for those of you who don't know, is an attempt to reframe an argument into a weaker position so that you can then defeat the argument. In regards to a sports trading contract, what that is a contract that's being traded, not an actual player per se. The player represents the value of the contract itself. The major difference here is that the player has the ability to opt out. They can just not play. They can not participate in that agreement. The slave does not have that right. So this is a straw man because it's not related to the argument whatsoever. In fact, I would almost say it's such a bad stretch that it's a red herring, but we can just go with straw man. Jill mentioned, this is another classic. I'm so glad that he said this. Show me, and this is a quote from Jill here, show me a chattel slave who got paid wages. You can't do it. And he's exactly right. Chattel slaves don't get paid wages, which is why there's absolutely no mention of chattel slaves getting paid wages in the Bible. And yet we do have mentions of chattel slavery in the Bible, as I have cited the scholarship on quite duly. Thank you very much. Jill says, well, then he wasn't a chattel slave. That was hilarious. Thank you for just solidifying my argument for me, Jill. Jill says, treat your victim well, right? That was really interesting. We'll get into that maybe in the cross-examination. Chattel versus debt slave. We'll get into that. But one other interesting comment that Jill made to point out here is he tried to assert that sojourner is somehow synonymous with slave, and it's not. Sojourner by definition is a traveler, a guest, or a lodger, right? And oftentimes would be used as like a student lodging in the house or a school where he was taught. Literally nothing to do with slavery whatsoever. So the fact that you treat your sojourners well simply means you were traveling through somebody else's land. You were lodged in somebody else's house, or maybe it's their territory or something like that. Nothing to do with slavery whatsoever. Another that's actually just a complete red herring. So the other thing I would like to point out really quick is that he said this is hilarious. He said that the Hebrews didn't become strangers in the land of Egypt until after the new Pharaoh took power and started mistreating them. That makes no sense. They were in the land of Egypt already, right? So their entrance into the land of Egypt would have initially made them strangers, right? Potentially even sojourners. So the fact that later on the new Pharaoh takes over does not then suddenly reduce them back to being a stranger when they wouldn't have been a stranger before. Like, that made no sense whatsoever. They weren't strangers, and all of a sudden the new Pharaoh takes over, and then they become strangers. How Jill came out with that, it's just mind-boggling. I don't know where, I don't know. Maybe he was up too late last night. But at any rate, hold on a second. Sorry, my wife just walked to the door. So yeah, I think I've pretty much blown up his entire opening in about 3 minutes, and I'll go ahead and concede the rest of my time.
All righty. Let's bring Jill up. Thank you, OE. All right, Jill, start you over. You have 5 minutes. Timer starts when you start talking.
5 minutes. That was, if you call that blowing up Jill's opening, then I don't know what blowing up means. We're going to have to define that term as well before this debate is over. That wasn't Jill or a Christian making some arbitrary comparison of chattel slavery and property, and that was an actual scholar. I don't know if you noticed. I cited an actual scholar, OE. So I'm not sure why you were objecting there and trying to make it seem as though that's just something we made up. But that is what A&E scholars have concluded when it comes to the word property. So I can cite Westbrook, I can cite Jay Schuyler, I can cite Meredith Klein, I can cite several scholars to say that servants are property or inherited is not to put them on the level of furniture. Okay? You'll never find any biblical scholar who's written anything on the Old Testament to suggest anything other than that. You might be able to find some internet atheists, perhaps, who would suggest Leviticus 25 is about anything other than that. But when it comes to, you said, I cited passages that said to treat your victim well. Well, that seems emotive. Where are the victims? Where did you prove that anyone was a victim? You didn't. You didn't demonstrate anything. Maybe you'll do that. Maybe you'll be able to do that in your cross exam. So, and thirdly, what did I say reduced them to what we would consider a chattel slave? Was it the fact that they were in the land of Egypt and then in the land of Egypt? No, it was the fact that they were being paid as hired workers. They were a vassal state. A vassal state is a state like a colony that's been conquered. Okay, that's just the reality of war. Okay, and God understands that. So in Israel or in the ancient Near East, if you lost a battle, your people worked for the victory, the victors' people. That's just how it was in tribal warfare. So what reduced them to chattel slaves was simply the harsh labor without any payment. That I clearly said that. So being in the land of Egypt and being a vassal state and being a colony doesn't necessarily make you a chattel slave. It's when the British began with the harsh payments and the taxation without representation, that's when they said enough. We want our independence. I don't understand why history does not ring a bell at all to you when you read an ancient text. The same thing has been happening throughout human history, throughout civilizations since the dawn of man. What reduced them to chattel slaves? Why God says no, needs to stop? When you start treating people not like humans who are there to work and with dignity and respect, but when you start treating them like animals, when you start treating them like they are not human beings, like they are actually furniture. So that's the distinction that God clearly makes in the Bible. And I wish OE would start making that distinction and reading this text a little bit more carefully. And I'll yield there.
All right. Thank you, Jill. All right. So let's bring both up. Now we're moving into our cross-examination. OE start. You have 20 minutes. Whenever
I think we
you
agreed to
start.
give Jill an extra 5 minutes. He wanted to do 25, if I remember right.
That's right. Yep. You've got 20. He's got 25. And start whenever you're ready.
Jill, a couple questions here for you, brother. So you mentioned that these slaves were all these slaves were getting paid, that there were no chattel slaves, but that goes against what scholarship says, as I cited it in my opening. So could you show me where in Leviticus 25, 44 through 46, that the slave being referred to as property is actually getting paid?
I've cited several passages from
None of
the
those related
Levitical
to the
law.
actual verse, the passage that I cited.
Okay.
So you're
Right.
conflating the debt slave with the chattel slave, and I know you're doing this intentionally. So let's get into the conflation.
There's no
and
chattel
sort
slave. The
that
word chattel didn't exist. Okay. So what I would suggest, OE, is this. When you're reading the Bible, in every case, the Bible is not going to restate that these are people who are hired workers. In some instances, it just may say evet or slave. So you can't say, well, you need to find where this person is being paid in this particular section of the law or this particular section of the book, when that might not be the author's intention to communicate that aspect of that transaction at that point. But if you want to look at Leviticus 25, I think there
Yeah,
is an
you said
instance.
that chattel's not specifically stated in the book. I agree with you there, but chattel is by definition an item of property. And so when I showed you the Hebrew lexicon for Leviticus 25, 44 through 46, where it says that your foreign slaves are your property, which you may pass down as inheritance. And I showed you the index where the glossary, where it actually shows the concordance, where it shows every single usage of that term, every single instance, every single one, it refers to a material possession.
There's a question.
Well, yeah, you're saying that it doesn't exist. I'm trying to figure out how you came to that conclusion, because I just showed you the evidence.
I answered that in my opening or rebuttal. The emphasis, and when you look up the word ahuzah, I think that's how you pronounce it, in the lexicon, the Hebrew lexicon, it does mean possession. Okay, that's an irrelevant factoid. It does mean holding. It does mean landed property, and it does mean hereditary possession. But the emphasis is on a legal holding, as you cited Westbrook. There's a distinction between a legal holding, being obligated to pay back someone because you owe them, like the IRS, you could wind up in jail. There's a difference between a legal holding and someone who is a chattel slave.
Yes, I know, and I cited the distinction. But brother, I cited the distinction. I already pointed that out.
Right.
We know
so the emphasis is on a legal holding or inheritance, not the intrinsic nature of what is possessed. So it's not saying that you are property like a piece of furniture, as I cited Dr. Schuyler on. It's saying you are property, meaning you owe money. You owe someone money,
No, that's not person. No, Jill, you're just flat out wrong. Let's read 39 through 46 to get the context. This is Leviticus 25 here. Make sure we're talking about the same thing. If any of your fellow Israelites become poor and sell themselves to you, do not make them work as slaves. They are to be treated as hired workers or temporary residents among you. They are to work for you until the year of Jubilee. Then they and their children are to be released, and they will go back to their own clans and to the property of their ancestors. Same use of property here as in land, as in a material place. Because the Israelites are my servants whom I brought out of Egypt, they must not be sold as slaves. Do not rule over them ruthlessly, but fear your God. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. Same use, property. The distinction, it's telling you right there. There are hired workers as hired workers or temporary residents, verse 40. Verse 44, from them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born into your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property, and can make them slaves for life. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. We get the distinction, and this is what the scholarship pointed out, the scholarship that I read, Prop, Marioka, Westbrook, etc. So how is it that you're saying that this doesn't exist when we clearly is laid out the distinction
at the end of this?
Slave? I'm asking the question. Okay. How is it you're saying this does not exist when you're continue to talk about debt slavery and ignore the context of what we just read, that there is a clear distinction, as the scholarship pointed out, between the debt slave and the chattel slave?
Where's the chattel slave? I don't see the chattel slave. You haven't demonstrated the chattel slave. So just all you've done.
I just gave you the definition of chattel. What is the definition of chattel?
Please? All you've
what
done,
is the definition of chattel?
No, you're asking a second question. Can I answer the first question?
Yeah, we're just focused on this one at a time.
Let's focus on the first question you asked, and then I'll answer the second.
No, Jill, this is my cross.
Yeah, brother. I know, right.
What is the definition?
So you don't want me to answer the first question?
Let's just stick it to we're going to go one step at a time, brother. What is the definition of chattel? This would be
the second step. So you don't want me to answer the first question you asked.
What is the definition? I'd like you to answer the question I'm asking you, please. What is the definition of chattel?
Chattel slavery. I would define chattel slavery.
No, I didn't say chattel slavery. I said, what is the definition of chattel? You say it's not there. What is the definition of chattel? The working definition.
There is no biblical definition of chattel.
I didn't say biblical definition. You can't give me a biblical definition.
So you can't take the present.
Yeah, you already agreed.
You're going to let me answer
the
your
word chattel is not in the Bible.
Or is this going to be a repeat of the last debate?
We already agreed.
Okay, you're not going to let me. You're not going to allow me to answer your questions and during your cross exam.
We already agreed.
All right, so we'll just listen to you talk. We'll listen to you talk.
What is?
And I won't. And I won't be allowed to answer your questions. Okay, go ahead.
I'm asking you the question. What does the word chattel mean? I didn't ask you if it's in the Bible. I said, what does the word mean? Well, since you don't want to answer, I'll answer it for you. It means property. What word do we find in the Bible? Okay, I'll answer that for you as well. We find the word property in the Bible. How do we know the context of what they're talking about is a material possession in the same way that chattel is defined today when we use chattel? Because of the context, which is why we use the lexicon to search the context and find out in every single usage of the word property is applied to a material possession. So we do see chattel described in the Bible and applied to foreign people, foreign slaves specifically. Ergo, you have chattel slavery, which is what the scholarship is saying. So my question to you is, why are you continuing to ignore what scholarship is saying, what's in the Bible, the exegesis itself of the context of property as it applies to the foreign slave, and you insist that these are hired workers? Why are you doing this?
Is that a question?
It is.
And what was the question? I didn't hear it in the 30-minute rant. What was the question?
No problem. Why are you continuing to ignore the chattel slavery that I have just laid out?
You haven't laid
and
out
continue to
chattel
insist
slavery.
that they're hired
You haven't
workers?
laid out chattel.
You're insisting they're hired workers, and
Yeah,
you're
that's
ignoring the
what-
chattel
right, that's
slavery.
what
Why are you doing
There's no
that?
chattel slavery there. That's why you haven't demonstrated anything.
So you're just not seeing it? Is that what you're telling
It's
me?
not there. You haven't demonstrated it. So is that your
Fair
your
enough.
question?
Okay. So you made the claim that they were to treat these sojourners well, right? Do you remember saying that in your opening, that they
Foreigners
were
and
to be treated
foreigners
well?
and sojourners,
Foreigners and
non-Israelites,
sojourners. Okay.
right?
Why do you think that means your chattel slaves are to be
There are
treated
no
well?
chattel slaves here to be
Why do you
treated
think that
anyway.
it means you need to treat your
You were
foreign
not
slaves
allowed to
well
have a
that are not
chattel
hired
slave in
workers?
Israel, according to Exodus 21.
Why do you think the slaves that are not hired workers, that are clearly in the Bible, why do you think that they have to be treated well?
Your assertion was that they're not hired workers. So you have to demonstrate, not just assert. You haven't demonstrated that they are chattel slaves. You just demonstrated that they're working.
Okay. Fair enough.
Fair enough.
So are you familiar with something? So do you think that the slaves wanted to be there?
Do I think that they wanted to be there? Many of them were
Yeah.
there because they were forced by economic circumstances. So yeah, they did want to be there.
They were forced, but they wanted to be. So
Through
they
their
wanted to be forced.
economic
That seems like a
circumstances,
contradiction.
yes. They had to take out a loan, an easy pay loan. And although you shouldn't be taking out any loans if you're a Christian. Okay. But in
So why do we get a
desperation, yes,
distinction
some of them
between
were forced.
why do we get a distinction between hired workers and slaves
Hired
in
workers
the
and
verse I just read
slaves.
you? Yeah, we get a clear
Hired
distinction
work.
in the verses I just read you.
A slave could be someone, as I already admitted to, who is a convicted thief who is forced to work. That's according to Exodus 22, I believe. So a convicted thief.
Well, I'm talking about Leviticus 25, 44 through 46.
Right. Where is the
distinction
chattel
between the
slave there?
hired worker.
Where's the chattel slave there? You're right. Because
Yeah, well, I've already explained it to you several times. So it says you have a hired worker,
Okay.
and then it says you cannot make them work as slaves. But then it says for the slaves
Right.
you may have,
So-
right? They're the
So
foreigners.
that makes them a chattel
So
slave
why is there a
because
distinction?
there was a distinction. The problem here is that you are trying to convince us that the distinction was between a chattel slave and a non-chattel slave. You haven't demonstrated.
No, I'm just pointing out the information that's there, and I'm letting the audience come to their own. I'm letting the audience come to their own conclusion.
Sure, they can
So
make the
please
same
don't assume what I'm
assumption you
trying to do
did,
here.
but you haven't
I'm asking you a
demonstrated a
question though,
chattel
brother.
slave.
Yeah.
So for
Yeah,
example,
you've already run away from that. You've
So-
already run away from
so
the
for
chattel part,
example-
which is fine. My question
So-
for you doesn't
so this
involve
isn't
the
a
word
cross
chattel.
exam.
This question,
So go ahead and finish.
Yeah, I didn't say chattel.
And
I
we'll
didn't say
actually
chattel, Jill.
hear a real cross exam when it's my turn. But go ahead.
Jill, I didn't use the word chattel in this question. You're inserting that to go back to your other point of denying that it's even there. Okay, can you please address the question I'm asking you? Why is there a distinction between a hired servant who gets paid and a slave? It specifically says you may not treat your hired worker as a slave, but then it says you may have slaves. So you get a distinction there. So why is that distinction there?
Yeah. So you were asking what the distinction is?
Why is it there?
Okay. So you're asking why is it there? You're not demonstrating because all you're doing is you're assuming it's there because one is a chattel slave and the other is not. Okay,
Again, you
so
continue
let
to
me give you
insert
an
the word
example.
that
Let
you
me give you
are.
an example of how
Okay.
there can be a distinction in law, even though both parties are human and both parties are treated with dignity and respect, but one has an easier time than another. Because you are a citizen, as I mentioned in my opening, you have privileges that a non-citizen does not have. Someone here who is working on a work visa does not have the same rights that I do. That's not evidence that they are a chattel slave. You need to actually demonstrate someone's being kidnapped and forced into a system of labor without their consent. That is what a chattel slave is. Since you would not allow me to define it, I'm defining it in this answer here. Okay? That's a chattel slave according to what we have experienced right here in our country. Someone who is forced to work against their will. They're in an area or a desert or place that's kidnapping without their permission, without their consent or volition, and they're forced to work. They're sold into a system of slavery or servitude. That's a chattel slave. You have not demonstrated that in Leviticus 25 at all.
Okay, that none of that addressed the question that I asked you whatsoever. You moved on to something completely differently. But just to clear this up really quickly,
That wasn't the question.
we're not talking about slavery. We're not talking about slavery in the antebellum South. First of all,
Never said
and
we
second of
were.
all, that's not the definition of that's not the definition of chattel.
Okay.
Nor is the
Chattel
definition of chattel
slave.
slave. It has nothing to do.
Not
Has
chattel.
nothing to do with kidnapping.
Chattel
The
slave.
definition of chattel slave has nothing to do with kidnapping.
Yes, it does.
Okay. No, it does not. Okay. It refers to the ownership of property, treating a person as a material possession. But
right.
We can move
you
on from that. You said
that in the scriptures.
Dignity. You said, Jill. You just said dignity and respect.
Right.
So, do you think that if a person treats a victim with dignity and respect, that does not make them a victim?
You
do
need
know what
to
Stockholm syndrome
victim, not just say I'm a
is?
victim.
Do you know what? Do you know what Stockholm syndrome is?
You need to actually demonstrate that they're victims.
Have you heard of Stockholm syndrome? Do you know what this is?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Stockholm syndrome. Why?
So in Stockholm syndrome, you have a victim,
You're
right?
going to educate us on Stockholm syndrome instead of doing your cross-exam?
I'm asking you a question. Is there a victim in the relationship that's related to Stockholm syndrome between the victim and the perpetrator of a crime?
You haven't demonstrated any
there?
Stockholm syndrome.
So Jail, I didn't ask if I had. I'm asking you a question.
Why are you giving me a relationship? On Stockholm
is there a victim?
Is there a victim?
Is there a victim? Yes.
Yes. There is an abuser and a victim.
Demonstrate that in somebody is being treated. So the fact that somebody is being treated with dignity and respect has nothing to do with whether or not there's a victim there, right?
You're not a victim if you're being treated with dignity and respect.
That's not what I asked you. That's not what I asked
you. If you're being treated with dignity and respect,
if a criminal,
and you want
if a criminal treats their
you're not a victim.
Dignity and respect, does that mean they're no longer a victim?
If you're being treated with dignity and respect, and you're there based on your own volition, you're not a victim. You just simply aren't.
Jill, that's not what I asked.
That is what you asked.
Again, you are straw manning. You're straw manning the question. So you can try to come up with it.
No, that person is not a victim.
If a victim.
No.
This is very simple. I'm keeping it as simple as I can for you. No. If there is a victim that is being treated with respect, does that mean they are no longer a victim? That's a yes or no question.
Is a victim being treated with respect? I don't.
Dignity and respect.
If you're being victimized, that person is not respecting you, even if they give you a ham sandwich. They're not respecting.
Well, I would agree. I would agree 100%, Joe, which is why your comment about dignity and respect means nothing. And I'm glad you pointed that out.
So
Thank
demonstrate.
We can move on to the next question.
Instead of just asserting. Demonstrate. That's
yes,
what
I've
we've
done
been
that
waiting
already
for 2 hours.
By demonstrating that people are being treated as property, that makes them a victim.
And we're going to find out what your definition of property is. That's what we're going to find out during my
cross. Gave you the definition of property already, and I also brought the examples of the Bible. It is a material possession that holds some value.
So what's your next question?
Material possession that holds some value.
Okay, what's your next
That's right. And we see that in the actual usage of the word property.
You don't know what a question. That's what we see. You don't know what a question is, do you? This is your.
You just asked me to explain this to you. You literally just asked me to explain this to you. Did you not need me to explain to you any longer?
This is your cross. So ask your next question, please.
Oh, you're done? Okay, so you don't need that explained anymore. Okay, let me see here. I think I will. Let me see here. I think I've probably got as much as I could get out of you. To be honest with you, I think the rest is just going to be a waste of time. So thank you very much, Jill. I appreciate you, and I'll go ahead and concede the rest of my time.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Objective Ethics. Jesus is Lord. You have 25 minutes and start when you're ready.
All right. The word property. Again, he tried to do this with the word
Is a question, Jill? Jill, are you asking a question?
Yes. Yeah, you tried to do this.
Sounded like you were getting ready to
the word purchase,
like give a speech there. Sorry.
So yes, the word purchase or buy means, according to the lexical Hebrew lexicons, to acquire, to buy, to obtain, to create. Notice that buy is only one meaning among several. So the word fundamentally means to acquire legal possession or rights. Okay. So in Genesis 4:1, I have acquired a man from the Lord. That was Eve speaking about her son, Cain. Did Eve purchase Cain as a piece of furniture? OE?
I don't know. I didn't come to debate Genesis and Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. I came to debate
It's
slavery.
the same word, quantity, where we get the word quantify. Okay, so Eve obviously did not purchase Cain. Okay, the same word is used to.
No, we don't. I don't know. I don't know that Eve didn't purchase Cain. I'm not conceding that. I have no idea.
Well, Cain was her son.
Maybe she did. Maybe because we know that there were other people in the land. We know that when Cain killed Abel, he was really worried about retribution from other people in the land. So we know that there were other people. Maybe she bought Cain as a servant, as a foreign slave, and owned him as property.
Okay, good. All right. So Leviticus 25 and Exodus 21 speaks about servants who were purchased with money. And the Hebrew expression is minquat kisef. And then, of course, I'm not pronouncing that correctly. It literally means an acquisition of silver or acquired by money. Does this describe the legal transaction or the person's intrinsic value?
Well, it can be related to both. Intrinsic value is a little bit, I'm not quite sure how you're applying that, but it could be both. It could be a legal transaction, and that transaction could be a representation of an intrinsic value of a piece of property. Yes, these people that were purchased, these people that were purchased had an intrinsic value to the purchaser as they were their property, right? Just like a piece of land or a cow or a goat or a sheep or anything like that.
So it could be either. This is Leviticus 25. These are the passages you cited. This is your debate. This is your argument, OE. You're just conceded that you don't know.
You didn't introduce an alternative.
It could be. You just conceded, sir.
I don't know.
You don't know. Is this describing a legal transaction like all of the other transactions in Leviticus 25? Or is it describing the person's value, their intrinsic value? Acquisition.
I just said one is related to the other. It's the same thing. If a person is purchased as a piece of material property, that property has an intrinsic value, just like a piece of land or a cattle, piece of livestock, or a piece of clothing. It holds and then an intrinsic value.
Okay, yes. So money changes hands, a legal relationship is created, and then the worker enters the household.
So the money that changes hands is from the buyer and the seller, not the slave itself. The slave is the object, not the subject.
Where is the third? There's no third party in Leviticus 25. This is the sojourner.
You haven't established any other party.
You haven't established a third party.
You haven't established that there's not a. You haven't established there's not a third party.
This is a legal transaction.
You haven't established there's not a third party.
The burden of proof is on you, sir. Remember, the burden of proof is on you.
No, you're the one making the claim.
Okay. You're making the claim that the Bible condones chattel slavery or prescribes it. So the burden of proof is on you, sir. And all I keep getting is, well, it could be, or could be this, or could be that. because there's nothing explicitly in the text that suggests such. This is just your assertion. So money changes hands, a legal relationship is created, the worker enters the household. Where is the definition of their humanity in that transaction?
So the way that we know that you're misrepresenting this is because you have to go to verse 39 for the context. It tells you what a hired worker is and who can be treated as a hired worker.
Okay, so the Bible is describing
a
how someone enters the household. Where is it defining their humanity? Show me in the text where it's defining them as property, as would be a piece of furniture, not a legal transaction, not money changing hands, or a legal
because you
relationship.
can pass them off as an inheritance, and because you can rule over them harshly, unlike your fellow Israelites who you're not to rule over harshly. It gives you the distinction.
Okay, so
there.
one is
It says, but your fellow Israelites you may not rule over ruthlessly.
Okay, so one has the easier job than the other.
That's not what it says. No, it doesn't say anything about an easy job or a hard job.
You said rule over harshly. So what does that mean? Does that mean that you're forcing them to work without pay? How
yes,
did you get that definition?
They don't get paid. There's nothing.
How did you get that definition,
in here
sir?
that they would be paid. In fact,
how did you get that
because
definition?
When you actually read the
context doesn't say that. Hold on. Does the context say that?
You asked me a question.
Okay.
Jill,
yeah, you said you found it in the context. Now I'm asking a different question, a follow-up question.
Yes.
You found it in the context, right?
Oh, okay.
You did answer. I heard your answer. Now I'm asking a follow-up question. Where in the context does it say that this person, harsh labor, means that they're being kidnapped and forced to work without pay? Where does it say that?
I didn't say they were being kidnapped.
Okay, well, what does harsh labor mean?
Though.
You said harsh labor means chattel slavery. How are you drawing, connecting those two dots?
I didn't say anything of the such.
So what is harsh labor? When it says that the people who are, I can tell you why, but we'll see. We want to see what you know about the text. When it says people are regulated to harsh labor, does that mean that they're somehow chattel slaves now? And so again,
no, what I've explained to you quite clearly is what defines them as chattel slaves is the fact that they are a material possession. They are property. Yeah, that's the definition.
That's
of
not
chattel.
The definition of property in the text, as I just showed you, or being acquired.
It is, as I've demonstrated. I have demonstrated, it actually is.
You gave us a definition, a modern definition of property in the ancient Near East.
No, I gave you the biblical.
No, you did not.
I gave you the biblical definition and showed you that in all 39 instances, it is used to reference a piece of material property, land.
Okay, so we're back to property. All right, money, so I'll go back to my first question. Okay.
Right. Your slaves, that's your property.
Sure, you're back to the word purchase or property.
You can pass on all those things as an inheritance.
All right, my next question. When the Bible says that someone is being acquired or bought, does that automatically imply commodity ownership? Can you demonstrate that? That the word qana automatically implies commodity ownership and not a legal transaction. Can you demonstrate that? Or are you just going to assert that that's the case? Go ahead.
Okay, and which word specifically is qana, please?
The word qana means to purchase, to own someone.
Okay. So qana is purchase. And what is your question?
Owner, possessor. How do you demonstrate? How can you demonstrate that the word qana automatically implies commodity ownership, like I own a car or a chair? Where is your demonstration?
Oh, okay. So yeah. So according to what you just told me, that qana, if I'm saying that correctly, infers ownership,
commodity ownership,
right? Purchaser,
sir, not just ownership, because ownership to them did not mean commodity ownership. It meant that you were agreeing to work for someone and you were their property. Property to them meant that the owner was now responsible for your well-being, one, and two, you were responsible for the work. That's what property meant in the ancient Near East. It was a contractual agreement between two willing parties One would work, the other would protect and provide. Okay?
No, that can't be the meaning because it's been applied to livestock and articles of clothing. How does that definition you gave even remotely apply to an article of clothing? That makes
Well,
no
the
sense.
reason why you
Or a
see
piece of land.
livestock, the
That makes
reason
no
why you
sense.
see livestock in that same chapter, and you also see purchasing of homes, is because it is giving you a commercial context. The context is commercial, not chattel. There's no one being robbed or stolen. Their land, when it talks about purchasing a cow or purchasing a house, no one is being stolen from. No one is being robbed or oppressed.
You're the
No
only
one
one
is being
asserting that
oppressed.
has
These are
anything to do
all
with
legal.
chattel
These are
slavery.
all legal.
That's your unique
These are
definition that doesn't match any definition that I've seen. Can you show me a definition where
these are
it
these
means
are all legal
that's what chattel
transactions.
actually?
Okay, these are all legal, voluntary transactions, including the transactions of people. But your mistake is you are assuming that that implies commodity ownership because it spoke about purchasing and trading houses and trading a cow for 3 doves. Yes, earlier in the chapter, it does talk about commodity ownership, but when it speaks about humans, it automatically imply that. Okay? So Leviticus 25 says that someone is being purchased with money. Correct? Okay.
It does.
What John Walton notes that well, let me not even go there with John Walton. You're not ready for that. A&E contracts look very different from contracts today. Would you agree? Ancient Near East contracts look different.
No, I would
They don't.
not.
They're similar.
In what way specifically are you talking about? That's a very vague general.
What we find
You're
where
gonna have to be
someone
much
is
more.
purchased, we don't find people being purchased in contracts today. True or false?
People are not purchased today. It's
Mhm.
illegal. That's
Okay.
right.
And when someone is purchased in the ancient Near East, did that mean that they would inherit property? Most likely.
Did that mean the purchased person would
Yeah,
inherit
yeah,
property? It's
yeah,
possible. It's
yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
The owner can do whatever he wants with his slave as long as he doesn't die within a couple of days. He can
Mhm.
beat him. He can give him a house. He can treat
Okay,
him
so
however he
they
wants.
can inherit property.
Just
Now,
don't knock out his teeth.
um,
Just don't knock out an eyeball. Just as long as he doesn't die in a couple of days, you could kick the shit out of him, or you could be a nice guy and give him your
you don't
house when he
have a
dies.
case.
It's
You
up
don't
to the
have a
owner.
case study for that actually. So you're just combining. You're reinterpreting the text. Okay. So inherited property, we have an actual case study of Eleazar, who was a slave from a foreign land. His parents were brought there to Abraham's estate, and he was born a slave, meaning he was passed on to Abraham. And the Bible says that if Abraham did not have a son, Eleazar would inherit all of Abraham's property. Okay? So A&E contracts look very different from
Yeah, your
our
inductive reasoning is
contracts
quite
today.
flawed. Your
Thank you.
inductive reasoning here is really
Okay.
flawed, Jill.
Could
You
these
cannot look at
my
one
next
instance
question,
and
my
assume that
next
applies to the
question,
whole
but you don't
picture.
have a case study of your piecemeal. I'm going to copy and paste passages from different contexts and make my own narrative. You don't even have a case study. You don't have 2 individuals where that happened to in the Bible. A story, nothing. Okay?
Yeah, we're not talking about
Nothing.
description. We're talking about
Take it.
prescription.
Yeah.
Remember, it's
No.
prescription.
A prescription would actually have application in the real world. Instead of you taking verses out of context and trying to piecemeal together a law that never existed in Israel, that never was
Okay,
practiced,
well, I actually
that
read you
never
the
was
description of
practiced. I
prescription
have
of
an
descriptive.
actual practical
You're
practice,
confused.
someone actually practicing the laws. Okay, you don't.
You're
I have
confused
someone
between
being
descriptive and
purchased. Ruth
prescriptive.
was purchased by Boaz. I have someone being purchased. I have someone that's inherited property. I have someone that is inherited property that will inherit Abraham's property. You have nothing. You have nothing. All right. So
Those
my
are
next question.
descriptions. It's not even related to the
Well, then
prompt. But
what you're
okay,
saying is not even descriptive or prescriptive because it's not in the Bible.
it's
It's not in
prescriptive.
the Bible.
I'm
All
talking
right. So
about the
my next question.
prescriptions in the Bible. Oh.
These individuals often could also marry freely, and they could become heirs. Okay, that's true. So purchase frequently meant acquiring legal authority over someone's labor or household membership. True or false? Acquiring legal authority over someone's
No,
labor.
no, I would not say it frequently
Mhm.
happened. No,
Okay.
you give me so far.
Does
You
it
give me one
always mean? Does it
instance.
always mean absolute ownership of the person's life?
Absolute ownership. If they're your property, it
Okay.
does.
And in what cases were people property? What law did they have to?
When in the case when you purchased or acquired a foreign slave, if a slave was born into your household,
Okay, like
if the slave was
Eleazar.
if you inherited a slave,
Mhm.
a slave from
Okay. Do you have any
your
examples?
father
Do
or
you have
whoever,
any examples of someone being born?
I don't need the descriptions.
You
I
don't
don't
have
need the
any
descriptions
examples
of
of
it
the
happening.
law.
I'm only
So
talking about the
you don't have any
prescriptions.
examples of the law actually being applied to someone,
I don't
a
need the
real person.
descriptions because we're
Well,
not
no,
debating
the law, the
description. We're debating
prescription would be
prescription.
applied to an actual person. That's called a case law. Do you understand how case law
Well, we
works?
would say in theory, yeah,
Okay, so do
we
you
would
have
make that
any
assumption in
case
theory, but
law?
that's
Do
not
you
the
have
debate.
any case law where we could see, okay, that's what that law means. Look at what happened to that person. That person inherited all of Abraham's wealth. That's what it means to be property. Do you have anything like that? No, you don't. My next
Again,
question.
we're not debating
My next question.
description.
What is
Okay.
manumission? What is manumission?
Manumission is released from
Okay.
slavery.
It's the legal act of freeing a slave or a bond servant. Okay. Could a
Yes.
master free a servant?
A master can do whatever he wants. They're his
Okay.
property.
Could he adopt a servant?
He could do whatever he wants.
Okay.
They're his
Could
property.
he make him an heir?
He could cut off the tip of his
Could he
penis
make him an heir to his
and force
estate?
him to participate in
Can
Jewish
he make him an
rituals
heir
in
to his
the Jewish
estate?
cult.
You're
He
having
could whip
trouble,
him.
huh? All right. My next question. The Newsy tablets. Are you familiar with the Newsy tablets? How much time do I have left?
You are
how
at,
many?
yep, 8 minutes.
Okay. Well, why does this matter? Well, no, this isn't my closing. I'll tell you why this matters in my closing. But let's go back to the word property. I have how many minutes? I'm sorry. 8 minutes. Okay. Let's go back to the word property and the idea that, which OE you just can't demonstrate otherwise, that the word itself does not determine the value of a person. Okay. The Hebrew, true or false, or you don't know if you don't know, the Hebrew often uses possession language for relationships that clearly do not imply dehumanization. Is that true or false?
It's false and relative to how the word property is used in this in this context, as I've cited.
It's how it's used in its context, and how is it used in this context?
Correct. As a material
As a
possession, in
material
the same way
possession.
a cloak or a piece of livestock or a piece of land.
Where does it say that the human is equal to a piece of livestock or a piece of land? Or is that your assertion?
It's the context of property in this. It's the use of the same word property.
Use the
Because
same
remember,
word
there's
property,
like three
right?
different ways that there are, I think, three different ways that the Hebrew writes property.
Mhm.
It could be written as money, for example, right? It could be written as property for specifically for material possession, and I can't remember the third way.
Mhm.
We see in this particular spelling, this particular usage, which I don't know how to enunciate it, but what I just demonstrated to you using the lexicon, English to Hebrew, in every single instance of this usage that we see in Leviticus 25, 44, or 40, 46,
Okay, so because it's
that it is as a
if I'm
material
understanding,
possession.
because it's using the same Hebrew word, then that means the word itself is determining the value of that person. It's putting them on
It's the context.
Same, you call that context.
Yeah,
Wow.
the context.
Wow. Well, we
It
need to
is, yeah.
have a Bible study, or actually a word study on how to read or how to understand language, because
Are you saying you and I need to?
the word itself does not
I would
determine
rather
the
poke
value of a
my
person.
own
Okay?
eyes out with a
Words
burning
are the
poker,
first
yeah.
lesson.
But
The first lesson we would learn is words are not univocal. Okay, they're not defined in the same way because you have a dictionary. Israel itself is called God's possession. True or false? Israel itself.
I'm sure that is quite
Okay.
true. Yeah, and yes, I'm
Okay.
quite sure. Yeah, they're also called a servant,
Children
not a
are
slave.
described as belonging or property of parents, right? Okay.
That's right, which is why you can throw
Right,
rocks at them
okay.
and to death if they disobey the
Okay.
parents, because they're the parents'
So
property.
just because
Right.
chickens are called property and the same real word is used to describe humans doesn't mean that we're putting humans on the level of chickens. We're just saying they're okay.
Yeah, it does.
All
You
right,
can
but
kick your
that's
chicken, you can kick your slave.
reasoning. That's fine. I think the audience can see that is fallacious reasoning. Okay. Do chickens who are also property inherit all of the master's wealth? OE?
They could if the master wanted to,
chicken
because it's
could
the master's
inherit all of
property.
the
He could leave
master's
it to a
wealth?
chicken. He could leave it to a chicken. Yeah, people have left property to their dogs and cats before.
I
It's
tell you-
happened many times
I'll
throughout
tell
history.
you who the chicken is going to be. It's going to be you, because you're never going to debate me again. You're never going to debate me again. Okay.
Well, that you are right about, Jill. I
You
grant
will
you
never
that. This will
debate
definitely
Jill
be our
again,
last time doing
okay?
this.
After this.
Yeah,
Oh,
you are.
oh.
You finally got something right. This whole debate, you finally landed. You landed a plane there. Good job.
So, were slaves recognized as legal persons in the ancient Near East?
Yes, they were.
Okay. Were they protected against physical abuse? They
No,
were not. Okay. All right.
no,
I guess we could say that's your opinion. Could they be killed at will? What was the
No.
punishment for killing a slave, an Aved, someone who was to inherit all of your wealth if you didn't have your own heir or son or firstborn?
Well,
What was the punishment
if-
for killing a slave in the ancient Near East?
Yeah, if it was deemed to be accidental or an act of God, so and the criteria for that was if they didn't knock out a teeth or blind an eye.
What
and
was
the
the
slave did not
punishment if
die
they
within
died?
48 hours,
Not if they did not die within
there
an
was
hour.
no
What was the punishment if you beat
Yeah,
someone
you have to have
and
the
they died?
context again.
What was the
Phil,
punishment?
because there were differences. If he died within 48 hours, there was a punishment. If he died outside of 48 hours,
Okay.
and the criteria
If he
was met,
died
then
within the
there was no
48
punishment.
hours,
So
what was the
him dying-
punishment?
Him dying doesn't get
If he
you-
died
doesn't
within
get
the
you there.
48 hours, what was the punishment? If
Yeah, within the 48 hours, yes, then the
the
master
master
would be put to death.
Okay, thank you. Thank
That's
you
correct.
for finally answering. And if he didn't die within the 48 hours, the master was not put to death.
Not punished at all, right?
Well, it didn't say he wasn't punished at all. Okay.
It does.
So why wasn't
It says there will
why
be no
wasn't
punishment. There will be no
right.
punishment.
So if he died, there was the punishment, and that punishment was death.
Within the
Yes.
first 48 hours, yep.
Okay. Why do you think
And if he knocked out a tooth or an eyeball, the slave was to go free.
Yeah, right. Why do
Yeah,
you think there was no punishment after the 48 hours? Or you saying there was no
Because then it could be considered that the slave died of natural cause. It would not be pinned directly because they had no real scientific method, no forensics, no forensic science, nothing like that. So they believed in supernatural things like
2
invisible
minutes,
wizard
guys.
sky and all that kind of stuff. So they might think that maybe the invisible wizard in the sky killed them or something like that.
Very good. Yeah, that's exactly right. And there is a practical reason. The servant represented economic value. Okay.
Yes, yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. That's right. As a purchased piece of property, right?
Right. So the law addresses how judges determine criminal responsibility. So the idea
Absolutely.
was, was this murder? Was this an accidental death? Was another illness involved? So the delay was to prevent an automatic murder conviction. Okay, because
Right.
the intent is less obvious. Okay, you answered
Right.
that one correctly. Wow. All right, so Israel had no forensic medication. So the issue is therefore judicial. It's not suggesting that you can beat anyone. Okay, thank you, OE. One more question. For the silly notion that there were landowners beating their own slaves to an inch of their life, it's often repeated on the internet from the atheist apologetics. channels. Why would someone? Why would someone? It's texting me. Why would someone intentionally destroy an expensive property that
30
belongs to his
seconds.
own household? Why would someone intentionally do that?
I would say there's a number of conceivable reasons, such as losing their temper, jealousy, right? Just anger in general, lack of production from the slave, feeling like their investment was not paying out for them, blaming the slave incorrectly for something that somebody else did, and the owner didn't know it. I mean, there's a number of reasons why they might do that. Maybe they're not that smart. The owner's just a really violent person. We know that the Hebrews were generally very violent people. And so it wouldn't surprise me if that they
Wow,
just,
that's
just
quite
went around
anti-Semitic of you.
whacking people.
My last question. My last question.
Time's up, guys. Do we want to do one more question?
Sure. He
Yeah,
can.
yeah.
One closing
Okay.
question. Yeah.
Do you think that's why the court? This might explain why the court hesitates to conclude that the master intended murder. That's why the 48 hours is there for the courts to figure out what happened, not giving you permission to beat your slave. Do you think
I'm not.
that's
I'm
more
not
likely
understanding
what
your
was
question.
going on, or whether Hebrews just all evil people that beat everyone up, everyone they've seen, including their wives? They're just horrible people.
I don't know if I would say they were just horrible people. I think that they were definitely very violent people. I mean, we know they were a warring nation. We know that they went in and took land away from the Canaanites, for example, and other people, the
Okay,
Cadians and
thank you, Oe. Thank you, Oe. So you have a hatred
the
for the Israel.
Sumerians and
We got you. All right.
All right. Okay. Let's go ahead and end it there. Thank you both for that. We are heading into the closing statements. The 7 minutes. Plus, if we want to go, what do we want to give it a little wiggle room? I'll give you a 2-minute warning. We're going to start with Jill, and whenever you are ready.
Okay, I think OE just revealed to us during that cross-examination where he is on this people of Israel, and that there is clearly some sort of bias that is undergirding his arguments and his beliefs about the Bible. When it comes to the Jewish people, he is making these wild assertions, and we didn't even speak about some of the other assertions that we hear on the internet about these people and how they live. That they were selling their own daughters into sex slavery. They were beating up their workers so it ensured their life. And we saw that when we actually took a look at the text and at the language that is being used, that was far from the case. Why would someone intentionally destroy the hand of their carpenter? That does not excuse violence. It simply explains why the court, the 48 hours, why the court hesitates. This could have been a domestic dispute. This could have been an argument. This could have been the owner defending himself from the attack of the slave. We need not assume that the Israelites were any different from us. You are no better than the Israelites, morally speaking, because you call yourself objective ethics and you've come up with some contrived ethical model that came from an ape, Lucy sharing her banana with her cousin, supposedly. So notice the text in Exodus 21, which I'll spend my closing concentrating on because it's one of the more famous passages that are cited by the atheist apologist. But OE's problem is he doesn't realize these arguments were debunked decades ago when, people like Sam Harris were trying to promote them in his books. There's no business like book business. I'm waiting for OE's book to come out. But Paul Capan, if anyone's interested in learning more about these subjects, wrote a book called Is God a Moral Monster? And he points this out. Notice the text does not say, if the slave survives 2 days, the beating is legal. Okay, so for one, the beating had to be justified. That would have been part of the 48 hours. Why did you beat him? Did he kidnap someone? Did he rape one of your female events or slaves? Why was he? So that's part of the 48 hours. That's part of the investigation. Okay, so it actually says the master is not subject to the particular murder penalty. That's all. Those are different claims. So the law discusses criminal liability for homicide, not whether the beating itself was morally acceptable. Whether or not the beating was morally acceptable will be decided by the courts. What law did he break? What law of Israel did he break? If you just arbitrarily beat him for no reason, then you're in trouble now. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Then lex talionis would take place then. So they would say, okay, you beat this slave unjustly. Although he survived, you have to let him go. Okay. One of the strongest arguments is context. In Exodus 21, it says, if the master knocks out the eye or tooth of his slave, the slave goes free. This is remarkable. The beating itself is already wrongful. It's already considered wrong. Okay. Verse 21 only explains why the homicide penalty cannot automatically be imposed if death is delayed. That's it. So Israel's laws were unusually protective for eveds or workers or slaves or sojourners. In the ancient Near East, slaves could often be killed with no legal consequence. The masters had near absolute authority. And when God steps into this system, he doesn't rip the entire economic fabric of the ancient Near East apart. That would be totally destructive for that society. It would be like coming back today or invading our society and getting rid of all banks because of the feds, because of the banking system, because of the crony capitalism. That would be undermining the entire economic system, causing starvation all across the entire region. What OE is probably suggesting as a solution. So what God does is he comes in and he says, okay, you can have an Eved, but guess what? He's going to inherit all of your wealth. Treat him with dignity and respect. There's a legal consequence for beating and hurting and harming him. And death is the punishment for killing him. You don't have absolute authority. Why? Because I am the Lord and I said so. Okay, and I'll yield there.
All right. Thank you, Joe. OE, we have 7 minutes on the clock. I don't think we added that, but take what you need, and I'll give you updates at 2.
All right. So I didn't really get too much into it, but we kind of mentioned it, glossed over it. For how the slave is not an agent, but is rather an object, I encourage you to look at Prop 2006, page 197, to do some more deep dives into comparisons about how these laws in the Hebrew Bible, these prescriptions, match up to prescriptions in other laws. I would look for Roth 1997, page 103 is a great resource on that. I also cited the scholarship, specifically Westbrook 2003, page 9. Again, Westbrook 2009, page 215, and Westbrook 2003b, page 380. I cited Milgram 2001, page 2230, Mendelsohn 1978, page 58, and Haas 2003, page 78 or 778. Excuse me. In addition, I did the exegesis using both the concordance and the lexicon, Hebrew to English. I showed where property was being used, the context it was being used, and all the context, every single example that we have of property in that being used in that way throughout the Bible. And it is as the slave is in fact a material possession, just like a piece of land, article of clothing, livestock, etc. I did successfully demonstrate that the Bible does prescribe slavery. Jill did demonstrate that he still does not know the definition of description and prescription, even though I read it out clearly to him, nor does he seem to know what the definition of chattel is, but that's okay. Hopefully he'll go back and rewatch this debate and maybe educate himself on that for his next attempt at doing this. It is interesting debating somebody like Jill, because Jill is a Calvinist, and we know that John Calvin, the namesake of where Calvinism comes from, was actually a defender of slavery, chattel slavery in particular. We look at the International Congress on Calvin research from 2010 in Calvin's own words, page 4. Now, and I quote, this is John Calvin, "Let us note that during that era, they did not have servants as we have them today, who offer their service for 1 year in return for certain wages. Instead, this was the sort of servitude which one sees today on the Barbary Coast, and in other countries where serfs are referred to as slaves. In those days, all servitude, and those days meaning biblical days, all servitude was of this kind, and amongst the pagans as well. And this servitude was perpetual, such that a man was left to stagnate for 100 years, without the least prospect of being released unless his master took pity on him. Furthermore, when a man owned serfs in this matter, he could arrange their marriage, since the serf was not free. His children were also born into servitude just like animals. Now this servitude was quite a harsh condition, as it was practiced everywhere, for it was regarded as legitimate even by Christians. It is not commanded that slavery be abolished. We see that St. Paul, when speaking to the masters of such servants who were loyal, does not command that they should be fully released, but that they should be treated with all humanity. Did John Calvin think people should be relatively humane to their slaves? Well, yes. So did the Muslims and the atheists. Did he think that there was anything wrong with owning another human being as permanent property? No. Did John Calvin defend chattel slavery? Yes. Does the Bible prescribe chattel slavery? Yes. Have we demonstrated in this debate tonight the affirmative position that the Bible does in fact prescribe slavery? Yes. And I'll concede the rest of my time.
All right. Well, there we have it. I'm going to go ahead and bring everybody else back up. Oh, there's Robin. All right. If you guys are going to have discussion after this, I'm going to go ahead and dip out. But thank you guys very much. Thank you, both of you, gentlemen, for being here. And I will be out in chat. Talk to you guys later.
Thank you, Hazel.
Yep. See you later, Rob.
Thank you, Hazel. You did a great job tonight. I really appreciate your non-biased and fair treatment of both of us, and I really appreciate your professionalism.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was good to meet you too, Joe. Thank you very much.
Good to meet you, Hazel, Dr. Hazel.
Yep.
Is it Dr. Hazel?
Professor.
Professor Hazel.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right, guys. See
Nice
ya.
to meet you. Yep. Can we take audience questions?
Was there any? I didn't see any. Like, I didn't write any down. I had some stuff going on here. So, if there is any audience questions, if you could put them in the chat here or whatever, then I don't care to.
I'll help keep an eye out for them as they pop up for you, Robin. Sorry, I was thinking.
Well, I think Hazel's gonna get there. I want to thank Professor Hazel for jumping in and doing what he did. He did a great job. And thank y'all to both of y'all for showing up and having a good debate. Seemed like y'all were back and forth quite a bit.
Well, I did have a question for OE about the debate title.
Yes, of course.
Why were you hesitant to change the debate title? Don't you
several
believe?
reasons. Several reasons. Yeah. So first of all, you specifically said the Bible does not condone slavery in the past, which is what started this whole debate. So I was glad to see, and I just want to make sure I'm on the same page. So you do concede that the Bible does in fact condone slavery, right?
Well, it depends on how you define condone. That's the reason why I requested the title change. When I realized it, I said, wait a minute, the word condone just means allow. Right? God allows.
It does allow. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So the reason that I want to do that title is that prompt is because those are the words that you said the Bible doesn't condone this. So I'm glad to see you've changed your position on that. However, the reason I was not willing to go to the prompt that you wanted to switch it to, two reasons. One, I didn't get notified about that until about a week maybe before the whole thing came up. This debate was supposed to happen. I didn't have time to go through and redo my argument. The other thing is I wouldn't have accepted your offer anyway, because it's very shifty. So specifically, you wanted to switch the prompt to, does the Bible sanction human trafficking or slave trafficking, I believe? And that is so fucking shady, bro. For you to switch the wording around. First of all, sanction has two meanings, and they're directly opposite. So it depends on context. You can actually say somebody sanctioned a punishment against a sanctioned sanctioned law, for example, without coming into a direct P not P contradiction, because there are two opposite meanings for the word sanction. So you could have squirmed behind the second meaning of sanction and said, look, it's not in the Bible, and I would agree with you. So therefore, there would be no debate, and you could have claimed victory. So that was really shady. Second of all, we're not talking about slave trafficking. Again, that's not even remotely interesting to debate, nor is it even relative. There's not enough context in the Bible to even have that discussion. So I felt like that was really shady for you to try and reframe it to that specific prompt. So why did you want to change the prompt?
Well, first of all, I never ever told you once that I believe the Bible condones slavery. I don't use the word condone for that reason. I used that word condone. I did a debate using the word condone years ago. And since then, I never used the word condone ever again. So you never heard me say condone. You might have heard me say prescribe, or a different word that would denote more of God accepting this behavior as normal, natural, and healthy, or okay, or morally good. Um, the word condone does not seem to, it sort of in a colloquial sense could mean that, but typically, just based off of the bare bone definition of the word, it just simply means to allow. So that's why I requested the change when I realized such.
Well, you just said
That
that,
was
and
a
I'm
typo.
glad we agreed on it tonight. But you just said that
Mhm.
God does not prescribe slavery in the Bible. So it sounds like we came
No,
to a good agreement on the prompt at the end of it all.
no, he does not prescribe or sanction slavery, but he does not stop it. In many cases, he allowed Joseph to be sold into slavery by
So
his
when you
own
say
brothers.
when you say
So he allows
sanction,
it.
though, we see a demonstration. Whether you want to admit because you were offering a description in place of a prescription, but we actually see a sanction
Well,
is to regulate from a position of authority, to make laws about, which we see that clearly there are laws being issued by God about how to handle slavery. That is, in fact, the definition of sanction.
yeah, the problem with that definition is it's not taking into account what is being sanctioned. For example, the system already existed. So what's being sanctioned are the laws are changed. During the sanctioning, there's some changes going on. So it's not taking the system as it is. It is saying, this system exists. I'm not going to rip it out and totally remove it. I'm going to make changes to it so that it is no longer chattel slavery. It is no longer oppressive. It is now something that every single one of us would have wanted to participate in, living in the ancient Near East in Israel's day, in Israel's time.
When we compare the
Okay.
slavery laws of the Hebrew Bible to the other slavery laws in the ancient Near East, we find that the Hebrew slave laws are actually more strict, not less strict.
That is false. That is
No,
false. And let me tell you why that's false. Let me tell you why that's false really quickly. What liberal scholarship has done, and that's who you're repeating. You don't realize it. That's who you're parroting right now. They will take the 7 years and say, well, the Hittite law or uh, the Canaanite laws, you only had to work 3 years. That is what they mean by harsher. That is the only thing they are citing as an example of more harsh, more years. More years does not mean less or more harsh.
it
You
certainly
have to
does.
actually look at, no, it does not.
Yes, it certainly
7 years.
does.
I'd rather
It
work
certainly
seven
does.
years.
You,
I'd
you
rather
have
work
more than
7 years.
twice as
I'd
long
rather,
that you
well,
have
hold
to.
on. Let me give you a simple analogy. I'd rather work 7 years with a great master than two with an harsh one.
Yeah, but you're asserting
Okay?
that they were great masters, and they weren't. We
So
actually
no,
went over that.
I'm demonstrating that the length of servitude does not make your laws any less attractive or more attractive.
It does.
It's how you treat that person during the 7 years.
I agree.
So
that
when
is
you
also
cite it,
relative.
when you
I
said more
agree
harsh,
that that's also
okay.
relative.
So when you say more harsh, when you say
yeah,
more
because it
harsh,
sets you
give
up
me
because
something
you
else
cannot-
besides the
because
number.
you-
Okay,
brother, you
give me an
cannot
example.
Yeah,
See,
you cannot assert
this is
that
the
they were
problem
being
with
treated well.
liberal scholarship. Zero demonstration. The only demonstration they gave was the length of years. Give me
Yeah, but you
something
cannot
besides.
assert that they
Give
were
me
being
something
treated well.
besides. Give me something besides the length of years that makes the Old Testament slave laws more harsh than the Code of Hammurabi. Go ahead.
You cannot, because your assertion is that they were being
Your
treated
assertion
well.
was
You
that it's
haven't
more harsh
demonstrated. You
because
have not
more years.
demonstrated.
That
No,
was
Jill,
your
you have not-
assertion. More
You have not
harsh.
demonstrated that they're being treated well. So the
He's
length
not
of
going
time
to be able to
is
do
an
it, sir.
example. That length of time is an example.
I hate to make you lose a debate twice, but that's what I do. Again, I'm going to ask you again. Besides the number of years, can you demonstrate another way in which you say, I don't think that's a good way. I don't think that's an actual good argument. But besides the number of years, can you demonstrate how the Code of Hammurabi was less harsh than the biblical slave code? Go ahead.
I do
Yeah,
have an audience
go ahead.
question when y'all get done with this.
Yeah, let him
Yeah, go
answer
ahead, Robin.
first, and then we'll get to
Go ahead.
let him answer first, and then we'll get to our audience question.
I mean, I don't.
So what we just saw is how deceptive liberal scholarship can be. That's why OE cannot answer me right now.
Well, I mean, I don't think that was part of his. Like, he's not a liberal scholar, though. But okay, let's.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying that's the argument from liberal scholarship, and these people write books on this, and you go out and purchase them, and
Yes,
this is
I have
how weak
Dr.
their arguments are. They are saying that the Code of Hammurabi was less harsh because of the 7 years versus the 3 years. That's their argument.
Yeah,
And
we
Oli
have
just
we
came
have
and provided that
we have
argument.
numerous
He
examples.
doesn't realize that it was debunked
Yes, we
10
do.
years ago.
We have numerous
Okay.
examples.
That's why he can't answer the question.
Here's
Yeah,
the
there are.
question.
Give me something
Women.
besides
So okay, Jill. So women, female slaves, according to the Code of Hammurabi 170 to 171, were granted property rights after the death of the master. Is one example. In third period, we LH 170 171, slaves were allowed to conduct their own cases in court. We don't see anything about that in the Hebrew Bible.
Here. So we're
No, they weren't. No, slaves
They
were
were.
not allowed to conduct their own cases in court. You
Yes,
cannot
they
get
were.
cite one
They had-
single passage.
they had
that allowed-
legal
no, you
rights as
cannot,
well.
Jill.
They
Okay,
had
give me
legal
the
rights as
chapter
well.
and verse. Where a foreign slave, a chattel slave, can conduct their own cases in court.
Well, if they were a citizen of Israel, yes. If they were not a citizen of Israel, then no.
Exactly.
You had
don't
to be a citizen.
You didn't have
Whether
to be
you were a
citizen.
foreigner or a Hebrew,
You did
didn't
not have
matter.
to be a
Whether
new
you were a
citizen in the new
Hittite,
kingdom of Egypt to have these rights.
you could become a citizen of Israel, even if you were from Damascus.
I just gave you two examples specifically
Okay.
of how these Middle
Okay,
Eastern
you want
laws
this-
were
Do you want the
more
audience
lenient.
question, Jill?
All
more
right.
lenient. Okay.
I
I'm
mean,
sure
like,
in many cases you would consider them to be more lenient, like 7 years versus 3.
okay,
Okay.
the debate's over though. Okay, were foreign slaves and livestock both described as forms of property in certain legal contexts? And that comes from Scott, the Mirror Point. Did you get the
I'm
question?
sorry, repeat that again.
Were foreign slaves and livestock both described as forms of property in certain legal contexts?
Yes,
Yeah.
I demonstrated that. Yes, and that's exactly the same Hebrew that's used specifically because, as I mentioned
am I
before,
answering the
Jill,
question or is
Both
OE?
Let
both will,
let
but
him
one at a
answer, then
time.
you can answer it. Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
So
but
I think-
the issue is
Jill,
again.
I'm in the middle of answering.
Well,
Did you want to go
that
first?
question was for me, right?
Jill, I'll let you. It didn't say who, but
Oh, okay. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'll let you go last. Okay, you'll
Okay.
have the last word. Okay.
So
All
the answer is yes. It was the same. It was used in the same context. I demonstrated that with the Hebrew lexicon, Hebrew to English, as well as citing the concordance. Right. When I cited the concordance, I showed in all 39 instances it's used specifically the same way because property can be spelled or used, framed 3 different ways. And I can't remember the third way. I know the other one is money. But in the context of Leviticus 25, 44, 46, where it says that they are your property that you can pass as an inheritance, that is the same exact way that it's used in every other sense. That is the same as livestock, to address Scott's question specifically.
Okay, go ahead, Jill.
So I would say, yeah, the same word is being used, the same Hebrew root word, meaning to hold or take possession of or to own, is being used. However, just like we say owner of a basketball team, that word owner is the same English word that we use when we say owner of a house. However, we don't consider the players on the basketball team to be slaves. Okay. So, and they're not treated as commodities, even though their boss is called their owner. Okay. So just because you have the same word that's being used in both circumstances doesn't mean it's denoting the same idea or idea of possession. This is the emphasis again on the Hebrew word, according to the lexicon. The emphasis is on the legal holding or inheritance. Chickens don't inherit the master's wealth. So again, OE, that was a major point in the debate. And I don't know why it seems like someone who maybe they weren't paying attention didn't get it. So just because I say you are owned, I own OE, and then I say I own my car. However, OE is going to inherit all my wealth. My car will not. My car will depreciate in value and one day be destroyed. Okay? Same word, 2 different types of things. One is a possession, one is a actual commodity, the other is an actual person. Using the same word to describe both of them. However, the meaning that I pour into that word, the nuance, the details surrounding how I treat that person are different. And that's what we have going on in the text. It's just that simple.
I think Mistress Kaylee actually is phrasing this as a question. She's typed it a couple times now, the same thing, and it does end in a question. So I'm assuming she's wanting that read.
Oh, okay. I thought he's good. Okay, it says God banned wearing mixed fabrics, banned eating seafood, growing multiple crops in the same field. He regulated slavery. How can you say God doesn't sanction slavery? Why is a cotton nylon shirt a sin?
That question seemed to be from me, but it was kind of not really clear. But it seemed to be that you were asking a few questions there. Why did God have these civil laws, and even some of the ceremonial laws, like wearing 2 fabrics and mixing fabrics, or wearing, he even at one point said, "Do not wear any other color but white." Okay, so why does he do this? He's God is really particular with his people. He just is. But God did not want even them to, not only did he not want them practicing chattel slavery, which is why he reformed the entire system of work. Okay. You could possess somebody, but guess what? They were going to possess your land. They were going to actually inherit part of your land. So if you want to have an event, you can have them. You can have them from other nations, but guess what? That event is going to get paid. He's eventually, and we see in Leviticus 25, the Eved who was brought to that nation of Israel actually became rich and began purchasing other workers himself. Now he had his own business. He's even purchasing Israelite slaves. So the foreigner comes to Israel as a foreigner, and a poor person more than likely, works under an Eved, gets rich, purchases his own land, hires his own Eveds. That's what we call capitalism today. Okay, so the emphasis is on legal holding or inheritance. It's not talking about the intrinsic nature of the person. But God is saying that he does not want you looking like them. God didn't want them acting like them. He didn't want them treating Eveds the same way. He didn't want them treating women the same way. He wanted them to be different, even to the point of what they wore. Okay. So actually, the laws that talk about wearing different fabrics actually helps to prove that the God of the Bible is actually doing something to reform that area. And to suggest that he was particular about wearing fabrics, but not particular about enslaving people is absurd.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah. So Jill is right to a certain degree here that it's not that God wants this. We'll go ahead and grant, for the sake of argument, that this God actually exists, even though he doesn't. This is all written by men who are trying to establish their own laws and rules to regulate themselves and their people group. But for the sake of argument, we'll say that God will pretend and play along that this invisible wizard actually is up in the sky making these commandments, right? So the reason that God wants these people separated is because this God of the Bible thinks that he wants his people to be different. He wants them to be much harsher than the rest of the people around him. He wants them to be able to throw rocks at disobedient children. He wants the men to be able to sleep around with any unmarried woman without any repercussion, but the women must maintain their virginity to marriage because he's a misogynist. He thinks that slavery, owning other people's property, is okay, and he thinks that owning them for a longer period of time for your debt servants than what the rest of the region around him was practicing. He thinks it's okay to beat your slaves. So Jill's right that the God of this Bible definitely does have a separate identity he wants for his people group. And according to the Calvinists and John Calvin, as we read earlier, the reason they're probably wearing these white robes is because they like white people.
I have another question here. Scott asked, the mirror point. Why is it that under biblical law, foreign slaves did not ordinarily inherit their master's land or estate? Instead, the master's descendants inherited both the land and the slave.
Is that a question for me?
I'm assuming it's for you, but I'm going to let both of y'all speak on it. But do you want to speak first, or you want OE go first?
Oh, you want to? Can you? Yeah, go ahead and repeat that. I didn't get.
And I'll read it again.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It says, "Why is it that under biblical law, foreign slaves did not ordinarily inherit their master's land or estate? Instead, the master's descendants inherited both the land and the slaves?"
Oh, that's a great question. They would inherit the master's wealth if the master did not have an heir. So we have an actual case study in Eleazar and Abraham, where the text says, and it sort of says it in a way in which it's not really a law, but it's just saying that's just the way it is, and that's just the way how God set it up in those days. Eleazar, if Abraham did not have an heir, if he did not have a son, Eleazar would become his heir to his estate. Okay. And as Eleazar was his Eved slave, born in his household. So he was born a slave, meaning his parents brought him there. And we don't know how his parents got there to Israel, but or to Abraham's estate. But
Was he
that
adopted? Did he adopt?
yeah,
it?
he was adopted. Right. They called it adoption through manumission.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I mean, like normally, like if a Hebrew died and he had slaves but no heir, like unless he had adopted a person,
Yeah.
that would go to like his brother, right?
No, the text seems to indicate that. Well, yeah, if he didn't, that it would go to the Eved. It would go to the Eved before it went to an immediate family member.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
it would go to the Eved. That's what the text suggests in that case study. But as far as I think the question was, does the Hebrew, or can the Hebrew be passed down? Yes, the idea is that you were responsible for those people, that you adopted them, so they became a part of the family. So if I'm an adopted kid and something happens to my parent, then I become I may be moving with the aunt or the uncle. So I am now I'm now part of that household. So that household was responsible for me. So those family members would have been responsible for Eleazar, if something had happened to Abraham. So that was the relationship. It's not an oppressive one. It's not one where Eleazar is being kidnapped and forced against his will, or his parents were kidnapped. It's one where the worker is embedded in the household of the Israelite. And I'll yield there.
Yeah, what Jill's doing is he's using this really bad argument that's based on his inductive reasoning, where he takes one example and then attempts to apply that to the whole group, right? And that's just really flawed for so many reasons. What we see here in the Middle Eastern laws that Jill was insisting there's no other laws that you could point to other than the fact that I think it's Law 117 in the Code of Hammurabi, where you are forced to release your debt slave after only 3 years, as opposed to the 7 years for the Hebrew laws. But we see that it was actually prescribed and codified, in fact, that if a man took a slave as a wife, she would automatically do an inheritance. And if he had a primary wife or a first-ranking wife, that concubine was still allowed a portion of the inheritance by law. We also see that what would be the New Kingdom in Egypt under what would be the Neo-Babylonian time, that the slaves all had rights in court. They could actually be represented or represent themselves in a legal case. We also see, according to Code of the Laws of Hammurabi 115 to 116, that if a slave is killed due to a beating, there is no restriction on the 48 hours or tooth and eye. It's at any point in time. If that slave is killed as a result of a beating, even if he lasts for 48 hours or 2 weeks or 3 weeks and then ends up dying, then there is punishment to be levied onto the owner of the slave, or to the man who borrows the man's slave. And I could go on and on and on. There's a great research into this. Look at Dan DeMayev, 1984, page 107, Ibid 113 to 114 for the law code itself. Lafnock and Westbrook did a great co-op on 2003, page 199. Jasno, 2003, page 321. There's so many scholars who have done comparative literature on, like I said, the laws of Urnama, the laws of Lipit Ishtar, the laws of Eshnuna, the laws of Hammurabi, Middle Assyrian laws, Hittite laws, Neo-Babylonian laws. We have so many documents, court recordings, letters, as I mentioned already in this debate, if you weren't there for my opening argument, to compare how much better or standard operating procedure we see with the Middle Eastern laws compared to the Hebrew laws. In almost all cases, all instances of what's being cited, at the very least, it's comparative. In most cases, these Mesopotamian Middle Eastern laws are actually more lenient or more gracious.
Okay.
And so I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Owen. Gio, did you have something else to say? Because we're getting ready to end.
Yeah. Those laws are so much better. 3 years versus 7. But let me just give you those fugitive slave laws, Hittite laws, were also a problem. But again, so you can cherry pick on what you think is the better law or system, but no system is perfect. The only system that's perfect is God's system, when he will bring, when he returns a second time and restore all things to new. So you can cherry pick and find bad things, and I can find horrible things like fugitive slave laws. Israel had no fugitive slave laws. So if you were an escaped fugitive slave from another nation, Israel would take you in, and they would not return you to a harsh slave master that you escaped from. Because the idea was that you were escaping because those people were treating you harshly. So they would come to Israel. Israel was sort of like the Dixie Mason line here in the United States. People would run to Israel for freedom because Israel had no fugitive slave laws. So when you talk about more harsher, and you can only give one really clear example, like the 3 versus the 7 years, it's just banter. It's really not substantive at all. But you said that there was no example other than Abraham and Eleazar. We have several, by the way, and we also have extra biblical sources as well, like the Nuzi tablets, which discuss the relationship between an Aved and a owner. We have the Joseph in Potiphar's house. We have Moses in Pharaoh's house. We have Proverbs 17. So the adoption language in the New Testament also. So there is adoption through manumission. This was a common theme. You can research this. All the A&E scholars knew this. And they didn't coin this term, adoption through manumission, which doesn't exist in the Bible, but they didn't coin it ad hoc. Okay?
Okay.
It comes from somewhere. The ancient
Robin,
Near East.
just really quick, since he responded to my comment, I know you're trying to get out of here, but I'd like to respond just really quickly to what he
I
said.
know,
Because,
but, like, I did not mean for y'all to get another debate started in here. So,
I'll keep it quick.
Like 2
Miss-
minutes. You got 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll
apiece.
be less.
Two
I'll be
more
less than
minutes
that.
apiece,
First
and
of all,
that's it.
yeah, I'll be
That's
less
all.
than that. First of all, for the things you just cited with Moses and Joseph, those adoptions were not by Hebrews. Those adoptions were by Egyptians, and those people were treated very well. So that doesn't even help your case at all. As far as the returning a slave, that had to do, and historians have already talked about this, actual scholars, that had to do with foreign policy. Okay, in certain situations, depending on who their neighbors were, they had a foreign policy where they were not to return the slaves because they were not in a partnership or relationship with their neighbors. So I'll just leave it at that. Okay, Robin.
No slave was allowed.
you.
Was a runaway slave. No, there were no such thing as runaway slaves in Israel. Moses is in Pharaoh's house. I did that to establish that this is going on in the ancient Near East. Okay, that this is an adoption through manumission. Even in Egypt, Egypt had the same type of system, and we can also show the Zibla and the Second Samuel. So we have the Newsy tablets. We have extra biblical sources. That's what I was giving you. It's called extra biblical sources.
Okay, thank y'all. All right, I want one more thing I want to say before I let everybody go. We had a little bit of contention with this debate over a few things. So I want to make sure that before we all leave, that everybody's satisfied with the way the debate went. So, OE, were you okay with everything that was changed and how the debate was handled?
Yes, thank you for hosting. Thank you to Hazel for moderating, and Jill, thank you for participating. And to everyone in the chat, thank you for showing up and supporting Robin's efforts.
Yeah, we had a good little crowd, pretty good crowd. What about you, Jill?
Oh, I loved the debate. Thank you for hosting. Thank you, OE, for participating. And we need to do this again.
And you were okay with everything the way
Yeah, that's fine. I was even okay with the leaving condone because I was going to make OE define all of his terms anyway. But yeah, I'm perfectly fine with the debate, and I enjoyed it. Oh, praise I am. Oh,
Yeah.
praise I am wants to debate you next.
Yeah.
Yeah, praise. You're welcome to reach out to me, brother. It's my email is objectiveethicsyt@gmail.com, and that's YT for YouTube. So objectiveethicsyt, and you can find that in the description of my YouTube channel. However you want to get a hold of me, I'd be happy to do a debate. Just let me know what the topic is. If we can come to an agreement on a topic and a prompt, and hopefully you'll stick to it, and we don't have to make any last minute changes, then that would be great.
Yeah.
Where's the after show?
I'm not. Well, I was tonight is Aiden's bachelor party. So
Oh, well, you're not invited.
well, I can be in chat. So I was going to go over there to that. I do
Okay,
want
all
to I do want to tell y'all that either one of y'all, if y'all want to download or upload this onto your channels or whatever, then I won't copyright strike you or anything. You can.
Can I just give a shout out to one of the people in the chat that's been running from me?
It's been running from you.
Yeah, his
Like,
name is McTime.
You did have no, don't be shouting. But you did have some people that showed up in support of you. I'm sure Praise was here for you, and who was that?
Yeah.
Other?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. But McTime, I can set up a one-on-one with you and I right now. Put a 1 in the chat if you agree to a one-on-one with Jill right now. Stop running from me. You go over there and you hide on that other channel over there where I'm only allowed on twice a week. There's a reason why they only allow me on twice a week. Okay? McTime, put a 1 in the chat if you want me to set that up.
He said, "Yeah, okay."
If
All
not,
right.
you're a coward. Okay?
thank y'all. And I'm like I said, I'm not going to have an after show tonight because Aiden is getting married and he's having his bachelor party right now. I don't even know if it's still going on, but I'm assuming it probably is. So,
All right. Can
all
you
right.
put a link to Aiden's channel in the private so I can
Yeah.
hop over there? I didn't even know he had a channel.
Oh, you didn't know Aiden had a channel?
No, I didn't. I might already be subscribed.
I think it's on. Is it on BS Lewis's channel though? I think